In today's PC market, it sometimes feels like there are no legitimate options when it comes to building a budget gaming PC that can, number one, not break your wallet, but then number two, actually perform reasonably. So I decided to set out and see, for $300, how good of a gaming PC could we construct? Now, there are several different ways that you could go about this. You could build it yourself, you come up with a parts list and put them all together. However, I found over the years of building gaming PCs that when you get into the sub $500 market, sometimes it actually makes a little bit more sense to buy a pre-built that's used and then go ahead and upgrade it. And that's exactly what I decided to do for this PC. Now, there's very little new about this gaming PC. You're not getting the latest and greatest, but you are getting decent gaming performance for less than $300 total spend with everything involved. And that does include a dedicated GPU in here that has 4 gigabytes of VRAM. And before we get into all of the parts, I will have affiliate links in the video description detailing all of this in case you're interested, or you could go over onto our website UFD Deals where I have this PC build laid out and you can see exactly what I've done, as well as potential upgrade options that you might want to consider for this PC. The way to go about this is actually pretty simple. There are a ton of these Dell pre-built PCs that are all over eBay because these are old office computers that have since been discarded and are being upgraded, which means number one, they're actually really affordable, but then number two, there's a lot of choice and variety that you can go through. So this Dell Optiplex 9020 MT had all of the specifications that I was looking for. At least 4 cores and 4 threads. 8 gigabytes of RAM is kind of the minimum of where you should be, even with a budget PC like this, and then has enough room for me to actually put a graphics card in here. The one that I settled on for this particular PC build only cost me $130, but it includes an i5-4570, 8 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM, and my version came with a 256 gigabyte SSD. But in case you don't want to follow what I did directly, you have options going all the way up to purchasing one of these with an i7, or even getting one with no hard drive to potentially save some money on that front. And there are a lot of configuration options that you can do with these Optiplexes. However, the key thing to look out for is the fact that some of them are not the same size, even though they have the same specifications. Some of them come quite thin, which means that you can't actually put a GPU in them. Like this one, you'd have to get a low profile version. So make sure that you're actually getting one that has the appropriate size, but otherwise you can mix and match to your heart's content. If you want an i7 but only want 4 gigabytes of RAM because you have 4 gigabytes of RAM lying at home so you can upgrade it, you could potentially save some money that way. There's a ton of options for you. You just need to make sure you're looking at the right space. Now for the GPU, there are not a lot of options that are available to us. Number one, we kind of have to pick and choose here. If we want to go with a really good GPU that's going to eat up the rest of our budget, we're also going to have to upgrade the power supply, which makes it so that we actually can't afford that much better GPU. So we're kind of stuck with GPUs that don't require any extra PCI Express power input because we're just going to be using the built-in power supply bomb that comes with these Dell Optiplexes. The one that's in this current system is rated for up to 290 watts of power output, which should be sufficient given the CPU and the GPU that we decided to go with here, which is the RX 550 4 gigabyte model, this one being specifically an Asus version. This GPU only cost me $109 right now, which between the system and the GPU, that means we're only at $240, which means I have $60 left in my budget. But as I mentioned earlier, we come to a conflict here. I could have spent more money on the GPU, but then would have also had to have spent at least $30 to $40 on the power supply, which means we're only spending an extra 20 bucks on the GPU, which you're likely not going to get a much substantially better experience out of a $20 more GPU. 130 bucks really doesn't buy you a whole lot right now. So I decided to settle with a $110 GPU, but then use the remaining budget to actually buy another SSD. A 500 gigabyte SSD right now is going to cost you anywhere between $40 and $60 depending on which version you got. I got a pretty low end one. This is a silicon power one. It doesn't have any DRAM. It's not going to be the best SSD that you could add into this system, but for only $44, it's going to do the job of storing all of the games that I actually want to have in here. So in total, this entire system is setting me back $282.98. There is a little bit of wiggle room out there for anybody who's trying to replicate it. You could potentially get one of these without any SSDs and then be able to potentially go all the way up to a 1 terabyte SSD between the savings that you had with the regular system and that extra 20 bucks that I have left in my budget. budget. Or potentially you might think that it's worth sacrificing the power supply because this is a ticking time bomb. The quality of these things is not really known, even though this thing says 80 plus gold. How good is it actually going to be in the long run? Not quite sure. So if you wanted to go that route, you could potentially do that too, because there is still room in that $300 budget to pull all of this off. Now, there is a lot of work that you could potentially do on an Optiplex like this. There are plenty of other YouTube channels that have covered how you could potentially modify it so that the side panel has a window in it, or you could potentially paint the rest of the system to actually look really good and make it so that it's color coordinated. For me, that's not something I particularly care about. I'm personally okay with the scratch and dent aesthetic that's kind of going on here because it's a budget PC. I didn't pay a whole lot, and typically I shove my PC away into a corner where you can't actually see it, so having it on display and looking nice isn't something that's really all that important to me. But in case it is, I'll leave a link in the video description to several other channels that have detailed how you can do something about this. But obviously you want to know how a $300 gaming PC performs in the latest games, so I loaded up my suite of AAA titles as well as some esports titles and tested them for you. Now, we're not going to be able to run this thing at 1080p high settings. That's not going to be where the sweet spot for this card lies. In case you want to get good frame rate, honestly, I recommend 720p, and personally, I recommend going down to low. So that's what I tested everything at, because I can tolerate a $300 PC not looking the best. Yes, some of these games aren't going to look as good as they could on medium, but I would rather have the higher frame rate in order to achieve that. So starting off the list is a brand new benchmark that I'm adding into the suite, which is Sony's God of War, which just came out for PC. At 720p low, we managed to average 40.3 FPS, a pretty playable experience in my estimation. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, this thing put out 43 FPS. Borderlands 3, we got over 60 at 68 FPS average. And Fortnite, a high refresh rate monitor will work for you. We averaged 135.3 FPS there. Halo Infinite's a little worse experience, especially as it's a more heavy hitting title, coming in at a 31.9 FPS average. Valorant was running pretty decently at 167.2 average. Horizon Zero Dawn coming in at 50.4 FPS average. Red Dead Redemption 2 totally got handled at 43.9 FPS. GTA 5, in case you're looking for that, comes in at 115 FPS average, and Resident Evil Village coming in at 98 FPS average. So every AAA title that I typically include in my benchmark suite got over a 30 FPS average, and a lot of the harder ones to run, like Red Dead or even the new God of War, we're still looking pretty good. Esports titles perform phenomenally on this, besides Halo Infinite, in case you're trying to get that for the free multiplayer. That was probably the roughest experience out of all of the games that I tested on this, but it was playable. You're probably going to want to upgrade if that's going to be your main title, but you can jump onto a game in case that's what your friends are playing. But as mentioned, everything that we talked about for this PC is linked in the video description or over on our website, UFD Deals. But I'm actually pretty impressed with how well a $300 gaming PC does here in 2022. Obviously, there's a GPU shortage. Prices are going up. The fact that I spent $110 on an RX 550 is really saddening, especially when I was able to pick up a GTX 970 for about $80 not only 18 months ago. So this isn't a bright, rosy picture, but this is a realistic build of something that you could potentially do right now. Let me know what you would choose to do with your $300 if you were looking to build a PC right now. I want to hear from you down below in the comments. With that being said, I'm Brett with the UFD Tech Channel. I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers.